My name is Sarah. I'm 25 years old, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes families have favorites. It's not a story about drama or revenge, but about how life's small injustices can shape who we become. I grew up in a 2-story house in Maple Heights, Ohio, one of those towns where everyone knows everyone, and secrets spread faster than gossip at the grocery store checkout line. My family always seemed normal on the outside. My dad worked as a manager at an auto parts factory. My mom was a secretary at a medical office, and we lived a typical middle-class American life. I had a brother 2 years older than me, Michael, who was always the family favorite. Not that anyone would admit it outright, but actions speak louder than words. When I turned 16 in March of 2015, my parents threw me a small party at home. I got a chocolate cake and some basic gifts. Nothing too fancy, but I was grateful. The very next day, my mom sat me down at our kitchen table while I was eating cereal before school. The morning sun streamed through our yellow curtains, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. She had that serious expression she wore when discussing important matters. "Sarah, honey, now that you're 16, your father and I think it's time you learned about responsibility," she said, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "We want you to get a job." I nearly choked on my Lucky Charms. A job? But I just turned 16 yesterday. Exactly. You're old enough now. It'll teach you valuable life skills and you can start saving for college and your own car. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. No discussion, no negotiation. Just a decision that had apparently been made without my input. I was expected to find employment while maintaining my grades, participating in the school's debate team, and helping with household chores. That afternoon, I walked home from Jefferson High School through the familiar streets of our neighborhood. The houses all looked similar with their neat lawns and white picket fences. Children played on swing sets in their backyards while their mothers hung laundry on clotheslines. It was the kind of scene that belonged on a postcard advertising small-town America. When I arrived home, I found Michael in the driveway, washing a brand-new Honda Civic. The car was a deep blue color that gleamed under the afternoon sun. He was whistling some popular song while running a soapy sponge over the hood. "Nice car," I said, dropping my backpack on the ground. "Whose is it?" He grinned at me, the kind of smile that made my stomach sink. "Mine. Mom and Dad surprised me today. Early 18th birthday present." I stared at the car, then at my brother, then back at the car. "Your birthday isn't until August. It's March. They said since I've been doing so well in school and I'll be heading to Ohio State in the fall, I deserve something special." He continued washing, completely oblivious to how his words felt like a punch to my gut. I stood there for a long moment, watching him lovingly clean his new car. The same parents who told me I needed to get a job to learn responsibility had just handed my brother a $10,000 vehicle 5 months early. The irony wasn't lost on me. That evening at dinner, the conversation revolved entirely around Michael's new car. My parents beamed with pride as he described its features, the way it handled, how his friends had reacted when he drove it to school. I sat quietly, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate, waiting for someone to mention that maybe I deserved some acknowledgement too. "Sarah seems quiet tonight," my dad finally noticed, halfway through dessert. "I'm fine," I replied, because what else was I supposed to say? That I felt like the invisible child? That their double standard was glaringly obvious? "Have you started looking for jobs yet?" Mom asked. "The sooner you start, the better." "I'll start this weekend," I mumbled. The next few weeks blurred together as I pounded the pavement looking for work. I applied at every store in the Maple Heights Plaza, walked into restaurants with my resume, and even inquired about babysitting jobs in the neighborhood. Most places wanted someone with experience, which was impossible to get without someone giving you a first chance. Meanwhile, Michael not only had his car, but also continued receiving his weekly allowance of $50. When I asked my parents why my allowance had been discontinued, they explained that working would teach me more about money management than handouts. "But Michael still gets his allowance," I pointed out. "Michael has different responsibilities," was my mother's response. I never did find out what those mysterious responsibilities were. Finally, after 3 weeks of searching, I landed a job at Subway in the strip mall near our house. The manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, was a kind woman in her 40s who took pity on my desperate situation. The pay was minimum wage, $7.25 per hour, and I was scheduled to work 15 hours a week around my school schedule. My first day was a disaster. I fumbled with the sandwich assembly line, confused customers' orders, and accidentally gave someone turkey instead of ham. The smell of baked bread and processed meats clung to my clothes and hair. By the time I got home, I was exhausted and smelled like a deli counter. "How was your first day at work?" Dad asked when I walked through the front door. "Challenging," I replied honestly. "Good. Challenges build character." Meanwhile, Michael was upstairs playing video games in his room, having spent his afternoon cruising around town in his Honda Civic with his girlfriend Jessica. The sound of his racing games echoed down the hallway while I sat at the kitchen table doing homework and nursing sore feet from standing all day. The pattern continued for months. I worked every Tuesday and Thursday after school, plus 8 hours on Saturdays. My grades remained solid, but I had to drop out of the debate team because I couldn't make it to practice. My social life suffered too, since I was either working or too tired to hang out with friends. Michael, on the other hand, seemed to float through his senior year without a care in the world. He joined the school's basketball team, even though he wasn't particularly good, dated the prettiest girl in his class, and spent his weekends at parties or driving around with his friends. His allowance covered his gas money and entertainment expenses. The inequality became more apparent during family gatherings. When relatives visited, my parents proudly showed off Michael's car and talked about his acceptance to Ohio State University. When asked about me, they mentioned my job at Subway, as if it were some kind of achievement award. "Sarah's learning the value of hard work," my Aunt Patricia observed during Easter dinner. "We believe in teaching our children responsibility," Mom replied, cutting into her ham with surgical precision. I wanted to point out that apparently this philosophy only applied to one of their children, but I kept my mouth shut. Family dinners weren't the place for arguments, especially not with relatives present. Summer arrived, and with it came longer hours at Subway. I was now working 30 hours a week, which meant I had little time for the typical teenage summer activities. While my classmates went to the community pool, attended summer festivals, or took family vacations, I was making sandwiches and cleaning tables. Michael got a summer job too, but his was different. My dad had arranged for him to work at his auto parts factory, doing light clerical work in the air-conditioned office. The pay was $12 per hour, and he only worked 25 hours per week. More money for fewer hours. Plus he kept his allowance. "It's good experience for his business degree," Dad explained when I asked about the obvious disparity. "What about good experience for me? You're getting plenty of experience in customer service. That's valuable too." I started saving every penny I earned, partly because I had to, and partly because I was determined to prove something to myself. While other kids my age spent their money on clothes, movies, and junk food, I deposited my paychecks into a savings account and watched the balance slowly grow. By August, when Michael's 18th birthday arrived, I had saved nearly $2,000. I felt proud of this accomplishment, even if nobody else seemed to notice or care. The birthday party my parents threw for Michael was elaborate compared to my modest celebration. They rented out a section of the local community center, hired a DJ, and invited what seemed like half the town. I worked a double shift at Subway that day, so I missed most of the party. When I finally arrived, the celebration was winding down. Michael was surrounded by friends, showing off his various gifts. In addition to keeping his car, he'd received a new laptop for college, clothes, and an envelope that I later learned contained $500 in cash. "Sorry I missed most of it," I told him, as I helped clean up paper plates and plastic cups. "No big deal. Mom said you had to work." The casualness of his response struck me. To him, my missing his party because I had to work was just a normal part of life. It didn't occur to him that maybe, just maybe, our parents could have arranged things differently if they'd wanted to. As summer ended and my junior year of high school began, the routine continued. Michael left for Ohio State University in Columbus, about 2 hours away. My parents drove him down in a caravan, with Dad following in the Honda Civic so Michael would have his car on campus. They spent the entire weekend helping him move into his dorm, buying him additional furniture and supplies, and taking him out to expensive dinners. I stayed home and worked my regular shifts at Subway. When they returned, the house felt strangely quiet without Michael's presence. For the first time in months, dinner conversations weren't dominated by his achievements or plans. Instead, my parents seemed to notice me more, asking about school and my job with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Your work ethic is really impressive, Sarah," Dad said one evening in September. Mrs. Rodriguez called me the other day to tell me what a reliable employee you are. I was surprised that my boss had contacted my father, but pleased that she'd said positive things. She's been really good to me. We're proud of how responsible you've become, Mom added. Michael could learn something from your dedication. This was the closest thing to acknowledgement I'd received in months, and it felt good. Maybe my parents were finally recognizing the unfairness of the situation. Maybe things would change now that Michael was away at college. But nothing changed. Michael called home every Sunday, and these conversations dominated our dinner discussions for the rest of the week. He was struggling with his business classes, had joined a fraternity, and needed money for various college expenses. Without fail, my parents would send him care packages filled with food, toiletries, and cash. Meanwhile, I continued working at Subway, saving money and maintaining my grades. By Christmas of my junior year, I had saved over $4,000. I was proud of this achievement, but it was also a reminder of how different my experience was from my brother's. During Michael's winter break, he came home with stories of college parties, spring break plans, and his new girlfriend. He'd also gained the infamous freshman 15 pounds and seemed to have developed a habit of sleeping until noon every day. College is so much work, he complained one morning while I was getting ready for my shift at Subway. I don't know how I'm going to pass accounting. I bit my tongue instead of pointing out that he spent most of his time playing video games and going to parties, based on his social media posts. Instead, I grabbed my work uniform and headed out into the cold December morning. The holidays highlighted the disparity even more. Michael received a new gaming system, expensive clothes, and another envelope of cash. I received some nice gifts too, but nothing on the same scale. What bothered me most wasn't the monetary difference, but the enthusiasm with which my parents presented his gifts versus the almost obligatory way they gave me mine. After New Year's, as Michael prepared to return to Ohio State, my parents sat me down for another serious conversation. This time, it was about my future. You'll be a senior next year, Mom began. We need to start thinking about college applications. I've been thinking about it, I replied. I've been saving money from work. That's good, but college is expensive. Have you considered community college first? You could live at home and keep working at Subway to help pay for it. I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. Michael went straight to a 4-year university. Michael's situation is different. He had a clear career path in mind. You haven't decided what you want to study yet. This was news to me. I'd mentioned wanting to study journalism multiple times, but apparently that wasn't considered a clear career path. Michael's vague interest in business, however, had been treated as a focused ambition worthy of full support. I want to study journalism, I said firmly. I've wanted to be a writer since I was 12. Writing isn't a stable career, honey. Maybe you should consider something more practical. The conversation ended with them encouraging me to apply to Cuyahoga Community College and continue living at home while pursuing a practical degree. No mention was made of the state university just 2 hours away where my brother was studying, or of the financial support they'd readily provided him. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about the future. I had good grades, work experience, and savings. I was probably more prepared for independence than Michael had been when he left for college. Yet my parents seemed determined to keep me close to home and dependent on them. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of applying only to community college as my parents suggested, I would secretly apply to several 4-year universities. I had the money saved to pay for application fees, and I was confident my grades and work experience would make me a competitive candidate. I spent the next few weeks researching schools, gathering recommendation letters from teachers, and writing essays. I applied to Ohio University, Miami University, and several others within a reasonable distance from home. I also applied to some schools farther away, just to see what might be possible. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Henderson, was helpful throughout the process. She'd watched me balance work and school for nearly 2 years and was impressed by my dedication. When I explained my situation, she understood why I was keeping my application secret. Your parents probably think they're being practical, she said during one of our meetings. But sometimes parents need to see that their children are capable of more than they imagined. The waiting period was agonizing. I continued working at Subway, saving money, and maintaining my grades while secretly hoping for acceptance letters. I'd given the schools my email address instead of our home address, so I could check for updates without my parents knowing. In March, just before my 17th birthday, the acceptances started coming in. Ohio University accepted me with a partial scholarship. Miami University offered me a place in their journalism program. Several other schools sent positive responses as well. The biggest surprise came from Northwestern University in Illinois. Not only had they accepted me, but they'd offered a substantial scholarship based on my academic performance and work experience. The financial aid package would cover most of my tuition, and I had enough saved to handle the remaining costs for at least the first year. I printed out all the acceptance letters and sat at my desk, staring at them in disbelief. These schools wanted me. They recognized my potential in a way my parents hadn't. I had options, real options, for my future. The question now was how to tell my parents. I knew they wouldn't be pleased that I'd gone behind their backs, but I also knew I couldn't let this opportunity pass by. I was 17 years old, nearly 18, and I'd worked hard for this chance. I decided to wait until after my birthday to break the news. Maybe the timing would soften the blow, or maybe I just needed a few more days to gather my courage. Either way, I spent the next week working my shifts at Subway and imagining what it would be like to live in a dorm, attend classes with other journalism students, and finally pursue my dreams. My 17th birthday was typically low-key. We had dinner at home, I got some nice gifts, and my parents mentioned how proud they were of my maturity and work ethic. It was a pleasant evening, which made what I had to do next even more difficult. The morning after my birthday, I waited until Michael had returned to college, and my parents were relaxed and drinking their morning coffee. I went to my room, gathered all the acceptance letters, and returned to the kitchen with them in my hands. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something important." They looked up from their newspapers with mild interest, probably expecting me to ask for more hours at work or permission to attend a school event. Instead, I placed the acceptance letters on the table between us. I applied to several universities, and I've been accepted to all of them. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents stared at the letters, then at me, then back at the letters. I could see my mother's face cycling through various emotions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked like disappointment. "Sarah," my father said slowly, "we talked about this. We agreed that community college was the best option for you. You decided that community college was the best option for me. I never agreed to anything." My mother picked up the Northwestern letter and read it carefully. "This school is in Illinois. That's hundreds of miles away. It's one of the best journalism programs in the country, and they're offering me a scholarship. How did you even apply to these schools without us knowing?" Dad asked. "I used my own money for application fees. Mrs. Henderson helped me with the process." The conversation that followed was the most intense discussion we'd ever had as a family. My parents were upset that I'd gone behind their backs, concerned about the expense, and worried about me being so far from home. I tried to explain that I was capable of handling college, that I'd been supporting myself for nearly 2 years, and that this was my chance to pursue my dreams. "Michael was 18 when he left for college," I pointed out. "I'll be 18 in a few months. That's different. Michael is a boy. Boys are naturally more independent." I stared at my mother in disbelief. In 2016, she was still operating under the assumption that gender determined independence and capability. I'd been working, saving money, and managing my own schedule for almost 2 years, but somehow I was considered less capable than my brother, who'd never held a job or managed his own finances. "I've proven that I'm independent. I've been taking care of myself while Michael was getting an allowance and having everything handed to him. That's not fair, Sarah. We've always treated you both equally." This statement was so far from reality that I almost laughed. Instead, I gathered the acceptance letters and stood up from the table. "I'm going to Northwestern in the fall. I have the money saved, I have the scholarship, and I'm 18 in a few months. I wanted to discuss this with you, not ask for permission." The argument continued for several days. My parents alternated between being angry about my deception and worried about my safety. They brought up every concern they could think of: the distance from home, the cost of living, the difficulty of the program, the dangers of big city life. None of their arguments addressed the real issue, which was that they'd never expected me to be capable of more than they'd planned for me. They'd boxed me into a certain role: the responsible, practical daughter who would stay close to home and follow a safe path. The idea that I might want or deserve the same opportunities they'd given Michael didn't seem to occur to them. Finally, after a week of tension, my mother made an observation that changed everything. I I suppose if you're determined to do this, we can't stop you. But don't expect us to bail you out if things get difficult. I wouldn't expect you to, I replied. I've been taking care of myself for a while now. That was when I saw it in her eyes. A flicker of recognition. Maybe she was finally realizing that her 16-year-old daughter had become someone capable and independent. Maybe she was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. The rest of senior year passed in a blur of college preparations, continued work at Subway, and gradually improving relations with my parents. They weren't enthusiastic about my choice, but they stopped actively opposing it. My father even admitted that he was impressed by my savings account and planning abilities. Michael, when he learned about my college plans during spring break, was genuinely surprised and supportive. I had no idea you were planning all this, he said. That's actually pretty cool, Sarah. Northwestern is a great school. Thanks. I'm nervous, but excited. You should be excited. You earned this. It was the first time my brother had acknowledged that I'd earned something through my own efforts, and it meant more to me than he probably realized. Graduation day arrived in May with the kind of perfect weather that makes you believe anything is possible. The sun was shining, the sky was cloudless, and I walked across that stage knowing I'd earned my diploma through my own hard work and determination. My parents sat in the audience, clapping politely when my name was called. But I could see the complex mix of emotions on their faces. Pride mixed with lingering concern about my college choice. After the ceremony, while other families celebrated at restaurants or threw parties, I went to work at Subway. It was a Saturday, and Mrs. Rodriguez had already approved my time off for the ceremony, but I wanted to pick up extra hours before leaving for Northwestern in August. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Michael's graduation celebration had lasted an entire weekend, mine consisted of a quick family dinner and then back to making sandwiches. Summer passed quickly as I worked full-time at Subway to save every possible dollar for college. My shifts were long, sometimes 10 hours a day, but I was focused on my goal. I calculated expenses obsessively: tuition, room and board, textbooks, transportation, emergency fund. Every sandwich I made brought me closer to independence. Michael came home from his sophomore year at Ohio State in May, and the difference in our summer experiences was stark. While I worked 60-hour weeks, he spent his days sleeping late, hanging out with high school friends, and enjoying what he called his last free summer before internships. My parents continued his allowance and paid for his entertainment, gas, and summer clothes. When I mentioned the disparity, they explained that Michael needed to enjoy his youth while he could. The comment stung because I was 18 years old, technically still in my youth, but I'd been working like an adult for over 2 years. I wondered when I'd lost the privilege of being young and carefree, or if I'd ever had it to begin with. As August approached, my anxiety about leaving home mixed with excitement about finally pursuing my dreams. I'd researched everything about Northwestern: the campus layout, the journalism program, the dormitory I'd be living in, even the weather patterns in Evanston, Illinois. I knew which professors I wanted to study under, which extracurricular activities I wanted to join, and which internships I hoped to pursue. My parents helped me shop for college supplies, but their assistance felt different from what I'd observed with Michael. They were practical and budget-conscious, steering me toward generic brands and basic necessities. When Michael had prepared for college, they'd bought him name-brand everything, and seemed to enjoy the shopping experience. With me, it felt more like checking items off a mandatory list. The night before I left for Northwestern, I worked my final shift at Subway. Mrs. Rodriguez had organized a small farewell gathering with the other employees, and they'd pooled their money to buy me a gift card for textbooks. These co-workers, who barely knew me outside of work, had shown more enthusiasm for my college plans than my own family. As I walked home from Subway that final night, I reflected on the past 2 years. I'd learned to wake up at 5 a.m. for opening shifts, to handle difficult customers with patience, to manage my time between work and school, and to save money for goals that mattered to me. I'd missed countless social events, worked through holidays, and sacrificed typical teenage experiences for financial independence. But I'd also gained something invaluable: the knowledge that I could rely on myself. I didn't need anyone to hand me opportunities or support my dreams. I could create my own path through hard work and determination. The morning of my departure, my parents loaded my belongings into our family car for the drive to Evanston. The mood was somber, almost like we were attending a funeral, rather than celebrating a new beginning. My mother kept making worried comments about the distance, the cost, and the challenges I'd face. My father remained mostly silent, occasionally asking practical questions about my meal plan or course schedule. The drive to Northwestern took about 6 hours, including stops for gas and food. As we crossed from Ohio into Indiana and then into Illinois, I watched the landscape change outside the window. The familiar sights of home gave way to new territories, and I felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation building in my chest. When we finally arrived at Northwestern's campus, I was struck by its beauty. The Gothic architecture, the lakefront location, the bustling activity of move-in day, everything felt like stepping into a dream I'd nurtured for months. Students and families were everywhere, carrying boxes, taking photos, and sharing excited conversations about the year ahead. My parents helped me move into my dormitory room, a small but comfortable space I'd be sharing with a roommate from California named Jennifer. They met Jennifer and her parents, who were warm and enthusiastic about their daughter's college experience. The contrast between the two families was obvious. Jennifer's parents radiated pride and excitement, while mine seemed resigned to a decision they didn't fully support. When it came time for goodbyes, my mother hugged me tightly and whispered that she'd miss me. My father shook my hand formally and told me to call if I needed anything, though we both knew I wouldn't. They drove away after lunch, leaving me standing in front of my dormitory with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. The first few weeks of college were overwhelming in the best possible way. I threw myself into classes, joined the student newspaper, and absorbed every opportunity to learn and grow. My journalism professors were brilliant, challenging me to think critically and write with precision. My classmates came from diverse backgrounds and brought perspectives I'd never encountered in small-town Ohio. But the transition wasn't without difficulties. The academic workload was intense, and I struggled initially with the pace and expectations. My roommate Jennifer received care packages from home weekly, filled with homemade cookies, spending money, and encouraging notes. My parents sent one package in September containing generic snacks and a brief note hoping I was doing well. The financial reality of college hit hard despite my careful planning. Textbooks cost more than I'd anticipated, and small expenses added up quickly. While other students went out for pizza or movies, I stayed in my room, budgeting every dollar and calculating how long my savings would last. I found a work-study job at the campus library, shelving books and helping with research 15 hours per week. The pay was minimal, but it helped stretch my savings and gave me a quiet place to study between shifts. I also picked up freelance writing assignments for local publications, using the skills I'd developed and my growing journalism knowledge. October brought the first real test of my independence. I came down with a severe case of the flu that left me bedridden for a week. While other students called their parents for comfort and care packages, I managed my illness alone, dragging myself to the campus health center and surviving on crackers and soup from the dormitory vending machine. During this illness, I received a call from Michael, who was now a junior at Ohio State. He'd heard from our parents that I was sick and wanted to check on me. His concern was genuine, and for the first time, I felt like he truly saw me as his sister, rather than just the responsible kid who worked at Subway. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked. "I could drive up there if you need anything." "I'm fine," I replied, though I was touched by his offer. "Just need rest. You know, Sarah, I've been thinking about what you said about things being different for us. I think you might be right." This acknowledgement from Michael meant more than any apology from my parents could have. He was finally recognizing the disparity that had shaped our childhood, and his willingness to admit it showed growth I hadn't expected. As fall semester continued, I found my rhythm at Northwestern. My grades were strong, my writing was improving, and I'd made friends who shared my passion for journalism. I was selected for the university's investigative reporting workshop, a competitive program that would give me advanced training and connections in the field. The workshop was led by Professor Martinez, a former Washington Post reporter who'd covered major political scandals. She was demanding but fair, pushing us to dig deeper, ask harder questions, and never accept easy answers. Under her guidance, I worked on a story about wage theft in Chicago restaurants, interviewing workers who'd been cheated out of overtime pay and tips. The investigation required me to work late nights and weekends, conducting interviews in neighborhoods I'd never seen before. I spoke with immigrant workers who were afraid to speak up, documented systematic violations of labor laws, and collaborated with legal aid organizations. The work was challenging and sometimes dangerous, but it felt meaningful in a way that making sandwiches never had. When the story was published in the campus newspaper and later picked up by a Chicago weekly, I felt a sense of accomplishment, unlike anything I'd experienced before. This was what I was meant to do: use my voice to shine light on injustice and give voice to people who couldn't speak for themselves. My parents called after seeing the article shared online. They'd read it and seemed genuinely impressed by the quality of my work and the importance of the story. For the first time, they began to understand why I'd chosen journalism and why Northwestern had been the right choice for me. "We're proud of what you're doing," my mother said during one of our rare phone conversations. "I'm sorry we didn't understand before." This wasn't quite an apology for years of unequal treatment, but it was acknowledgement that I'd been right about my own capabilities and dreams. It was more than I'd expected, and enough to begin healing some of the resentment I'd carried. Winter break brought me home to Ohio, but the visit felt different than previous returns. I'd changed during my semester away, becoming more confident and self-assured. My parents seemed to notice the transformation, treating me with a new level of respect and interest in my opinions. Michael was home too, and we spent time together as adults, rather than as the unequal siblings we'd been in high school. He asked about my classes, my career plans, and my life in Chicago. In return, I learned that his college experience hadn't been as easy as I'd imagined. He'd struggled with several classes, had a difficult breakup, and was questioning his major. "Sometimes I wonder if I should have gotten a job like you did," he admitted one evening as we sat in our childhood living room. "I feel like I don't know how to handle real-world problems." This conversation revealed something I hadn't considered. While the unequal treatment had been painful for me, it might not have been beneficial for Michael either. Being given everything without working for it had left him unprepared for challenges and setbacks. My parents' attempt to make his life easier had actually made it harder in some ways. When I returned to Northwestern for spring semester, I felt more confident about my choice and my future. The second semester brought new challenges: advanced reporting classes, an internship at a Chicago magazine, and increased financial pressure as my savings dwindled. The internship was unpaid, which created a difficult choice. I needed the experience and connections it would provide, but I also needed income to continue funding my education. I decided to take the internship and picked up additional freelance work to compensate, often working until midnight to meet deadlines for both my classes and my writing assignments. The pace was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. I was learning from professional journalists, building a portfolio of published work, and making connections that would serve me throughout my career. My internship supervisor, a veteran magazine editor named David Chen, became a mentor who pushed me to think bigger about my career goals. "You have the talent and work ethic to succeed in this field," he told me during one of our weekly meetings, "but you need to be strategic about building your career." Under his guidance, I began planning my next steps. I applied for competitive summer internships at major publications, researched graduate programs in journalism, and started building relationships with working journalists who could provide guidance and opportunities. Spring semester flew by in a blur of deadlines, interviews, and late-night writing sessions. I maintained my academic performance while building my professional portfolio and managing my finances. It was the most challenging period of my life, but also the most rewarding. The culmination of my freshman year came when I was accepted for a summer internship at the Chicago Tribune, one of the most prestigious newspapers in the country. The internship was paid, which solved my immediate financial concerns, and it would provide invaluable experience working alongside seasoned reporters. When I called my parents to share the news, their response was overwhelmingly positive. They seemed to finally understand that my career choice was legitimate and that I was succeeding at a high level. My father even said he was proud of my accomplishments, words I'd waited years to hear. The summer internship at the Tribune was everything I'd hoped it would be, and more. I worked on stories ranging from local politics to social justice issues, learning from reporters who'd been covering Chicago for decades. My editors were impressed by my work ethic and the quality of my writing, and several offered to serve as references for future opportunities. One story I worked on that summer became the turning point in my relationship with my family. I investigated a scandal involving a local politician who'd been steering city contracts to his family's businesses. The story required weeks of research, dozens of interviews, and careful fact-checking to ensure accuracy. When the story was published, it created a significant impact. The politician resigned, investigations were launched, and reforms were implemented. Local news outlets picked up the story, and it was shared widely on social media. For the first time, my parents saw the real-world impact of the work I was doing. "Your article is all over Facebook," my mother called to tell me. "Everyone in town is talking about it." The recognition felt good, but more importantly, it validated my belief that journalism could make a difference. I wasn't just writing to fill newspaper pages. I was holding powerful people accountable and serving the public interest. As my sophomore year at Northwestern began, I reflected on how much had changed since that conversation at the kitchen table when I was 16. I'd gone from feeling invisible and undervalued to becoming someone whose work mattered. The unfair treatment I'd experienced had been painful, but it had also given me resilience and determination that served me well in a competitive field. My relationship with my family continued to evolve. My parents began calling more frequently, asking about my classes and my career plans with genuine interest. They even started reading my published articles and sharing them with friends and relatives. It wasn't the same as having had their support from the beginning, but it was progress. Michael and I developed a closer relationship as well. He'd switched his major to education after realizing that business wasn't his true calling, and he often sought my advice about making difficult decisions. The dynamic between us had shifted from older brother and younger sister to equals who supported each other. "I'm proud of you for going after what you wanted," he told me during one of our phone conversations. "I don't think I would have had the courage to do what you did." This acknowledgement meant everything to me. It showed that he understood the courage it had taken to challenge our parents' expectations and pursue my dreams despite their initial opposition. As I progressed through my sophomore year, I continued to build my journalism career. I was promoted to a leadership position at the student newspaper. My freelance work was published in increasingly prestigious outlets, and I was selected for advanced reporting workshops. Professors began recommending me for competitive opportunities, and I was building a network of professional contacts. The financial challenges remained, but I'd learned to manage them. I worked multiple jobs, applied for scholarships, and budgeted carefully. Unlike many of my classmates who relied on their parents for financial support, I took pride in funding my own education through hard work and determination. During spring break of my sophomore year, I returned home to Ohio for the first time in months. The visit was different from previous trips. My parents treated me as an adult, asked for my opinions on family matters, and seemed genuinely interested in my life and career. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, my father made an observation that surprised me. "You know, Sarah, I think we made some mistakes when you and Michael were younger. We didn't treat you fairly, and I'm sorry for that." This was the closest thing to an apology I'd received, and it felt significant. My mother nodded in agreement, adding that they'd been proud of my accomplishments and impressed by my independence. "We were trying to prepare you for the real world," she said, "but maybe we went about it the wrong way." I appreciated their acknowledgement, though part of me wondered if they would have had this realization if I hadn't succeeded, despite their lack of support. Would they have apologized if I'd struggled or failed? It was a question I couldn't answer, but I chose to focus on the progress we'd made, rather than dwell on what might have been. The conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. My parents began treating me with the respect and consideration they'd always shown Michael. They asked about my career goals, offered to help with graduate school applications, and even suggested I consider studying abroad. As I prepared to enter my junior year at Northwestern, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The 16-year-old girl who'd been told to get a job while her brother received a car and allowance had become a confident young woman pursuing her dreams at one of the country's top universities. The unfair treatment I'd experienced had shaped me in ways I was still discovering. It had taught me self-reliance, given me empathy for others facing challenges, and instilled a work ethic that set me apart from my peers. While I wouldn't have chosen to be treated differently from my brother, I could acknowledge that the experience had made me stronger. My junior year brought new opportunities and challenges. I was selected for Northwestern's prestigious Washington, D.C. program, which would allow me to spend a semester working for a major news organization while taking classes at the university's D.C. campus. The program was highly competitive, and my selection was based on my academic performance and professional experience. The semester in Washington was transformative. I worked at a major news magazine, covering national politics and policy issues. The work was demanding and fast-paced, but it confirmed that I'd chosen the right career path. I thrived in the competitive environment and impressed my supervisors with my reporting skills and professionalism. Living in Washington also gave me perspective on my small-town Ohio upbringing. I met people from all over the world, worked alongside journalists who covered international affairs, and began to understand the broader impact of the work I wanted to do. The girl who'd made sandwiches at Subway was now interviewing senators and covering congressional hearings. When I returned to Northwestern for my final semester, I was a different person than the one who'd left. I had clarity about my career goals, confidence in my abilities, and a network of professional contacts who respected my work. My professors noticed the change and began treating me more like a colleague than a student. Graduate school applications dominated my senior year. I applied to the top journalism programs in the country, including Columbia, Harvard, and Stanford. Each application required essays, writing samples, and recommendations, but I felt prepared for the process. The acceptance letters began arriving in March, just as I was turning 22. Columbia offered me a place in their investigative reporting program, with a partial scholarship. Harvard accepted me for their joint journalism and public policy degree. Stanford offered a full scholarship for their documentary journalism program. As I sat in my dorm room, surrounded by acceptance letters from the country's most prestigious universities, I thought about the path that had led me here. Every sandwich I'd made at Subway, every late night spent writing articles, every dollar I'd saved had contributed to these opportunities. My parents' reaction to my graduate school acceptances was overwhelming positive. They seemed to finally understand the significance of what I'd accomplished and the potential of my chosen career. My father even offered to help with expenses, though I politely declined. I'd funded my undergraduate education independently, and I wanted to continue that pattern. "We're so proud of you," my mother said during one of our phone calls. "You've accomplished so much on your own." This acknowledgement felt like the completion of a long journey. The parents who'd once questioned my career choice and tried to steer me toward community college were now celebrating my acceptance to elite graduate programs. Michael's response was equally gratifying. He'd graduated from Ohio State and was beginning his teaching career at a middle school in Columbus. He seemed genuinely impressed by my accomplishments and proud to be my brother. "Remember when you were 16 and working at Subway?" he asked during one of our conversations. "Did you ever imagine you'd end up at these schools?" "Honestly, I don't think I dared to imagine it," I replied, but I knew I wanted something different from what our parents had planned for me. "Well, you definitely got something different, and better." As graduation approached, I reflected on the lessons I'd learned during my time at Northwestern. The most important lesson was the power of believing in yourself when others don't. My parents had seen me as the practical, responsible daughter who should stay close to home and follow a safe path. I'd seen myself as someone capable of more, and I'd been willing to work for it. The unfair treatment I'd received as a teenager had been painful, but it had also been instructive. It taught me that I couldn't rely on others to recognize my potential or support my dreams. I had to create my own opportunities and advocate for myself. Graduation day was everything I'd hoped it would be. My parents drove to Evanston for the ceremony, and their pride was evident. They took dozens of photos, introduced me to other parents as their daughter, the journalist, and seemed genuinely happy to celebrate my accomplishments. After the ceremony, we went to dinner at a nice restaurant near campus. As we sat around the table, sharing stories and laughing together, I felt like we'd finally found our way to a healthy family dynamic. The inequality that had defined my teenage years had been replaced by mutual respect and understanding. "So, what's next?" my father asked as we finished dessert. "Columbia in the fall," I replied. "I want to specialize in investigative reporting, maybe focus on corporate accountability or political corruption." "That sounds perfect for you," my mother said. "You've always been good at asking the hard questions." This observation made me smile. The quality she'd once seen as troublesome, my tendency to question unfair treatment, was now recognized as a professional asset. As I prepared to leave Northwestern and begin the next chapter of my life, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought me to this point. The 16-year-old who'd been told to get a job while her brother got a car, and Allowance had become a confident young woman with a clear vision for her future. The story of my family's favoritism hadn't ended with vindication or revenge. Instead, it had ended with growth, understanding, and the quiet satisfaction of proving that sometimes the overlooked child is the one who surprises everyone, including herself. I'd learned that fairness isn't always about equal treatment, but about recognizing and nurturing each person's unique potential. My parents had failed to do that when I was young, but they'd eventually come to understand their mistake. More importantly, I'd learned to recognize and nurture my own potential, regardless of whether others supported me. The job I'd gotten at 16 hadn't just taught me about making sandwiches or managing money. It had taught me about resilience, self-reliance, and the satisfaction that comes from earning your own way. These lessons had served me well in college and would continue to serve me throughout my career. As I packed my belongings and prepared to leave Northwestern, I thought about the girl I'd been and the woman I'd become. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I was heading to Columbia University with a clear sense of purpose, a strong work ethic, and the confidence that comes from overcoming challenges through determination and hard work. The unequal treatment I'd experienced had shaped me, but it hadn't defined me. I'd taken the unfairness and turned it into fuel for my ambitions. I'd proven that sometimes the child who's expected to do less ends up accomplishing more than anyone imagined possible.